Hello. Awkward face there because I'm a very socially awkward person, typically very British. And I guess I want to start with, look, I've been in marketing for about 11 years now. Social media throughout, and I've worked across some of the biggest brands in the world. And I've learned a huge amount because of all the need states of these particular different brands. So everything from ExxonMobil, understanding how we plug customer service into social media and the value that's driven, to crisis management on Volkswagen, integrated media, and just a whole plethora of different disciplines. And this has led me to being offered the job at one of the most iconic brands in Denmark and one of the most iconic brands in the world. And it was a true honor just to be considered for a company such as Bang & Olufsen. So I guess I'm only 6 months in, so I'm only really early days. And I guess what I wanted to do was just kind of get the fundamentals in place and clean up everything that we were doing previously. And I thought that I wanted to grow, and I think that everything that underpins what we do should be, in effect, effective. So I guess first things first is to create change. It's important to get those fundamental elements in place, right? We have to get those elements in place, and this is setting those strategic parameters, ensuring what we're measuring, and that what we're measuring is effective, ensuring that we're designing creative for social. So basically teaching our entire global network how to do social and how to do it social properly, and to ensure that we're delivering effectiveness for our stakeholders. And just don't assume that everyone gets social, right? Because the terminology that we all use in social can be filled with jargon, can sound intimidating, and you could be met with a lot of blank faces from people who frankly do not give a shit. So, just a few examples of the kind of words that get used, and I think, it can be a little esoteric, micro-influencers, macro-influencers, and all the rest of it, and it can sound confusing. And I've been stuck in those conversations. I've been staring at my bosses and my boss's bosses, and they just stare at me ashen-faced. They stare at me blare-faced, and they don't care about this, right? What they care about, but ultimately they don't care. But senior stakeholders, they care about results, and they care about the numbers. So we have to build the trust. We have to ensure that what we're doing is right, what we're doing is effective, and they get that. So I guess what I wanted to do is, one of the first things I wanted to do was create a roadmap for success, right? So first and foremost, get those foundations in order. We have key cities that we've identified across the world, 5. They're doing social, and they're doing social in their own different ways. We have a retailer network who are executing social to some degree quite well, to some degree absolutely terribly. So what I want to ensure is that we have a consistent brand experience across every single channel that we have. So you're integrating with Bang & Olufsen in China, in Japan, in New York. It's a similar premium luxury lifestyle experience. And how do we do that? We set those strategic parameters in place. Then we want to get good at it. I mean, we are already pretty good at it, to be honest with you. But we want to make sure that we're best in class. And that means that we're measuring right the way through. That means that we're designing for platform. That means we're understanding audience. That means we're communicating in a way that the audience understands. And that we're landing the brand and building it, right? And then thirdly, that social is part of the brand's DNA. So it's built into every single process. It's built into all of the creation. It's built into all of the creative influences that we work with across the globe are consistent. They're on brand. So everything that we're doing sort of ladders all the way up to those core kind of social and brand values. And I guess the first thing, I came from a creative agency. I have a creative agency background. And the first thing is that we produce beautiful content, and we always have done. However, I think there are creative principles that are slightly different on social. Basically, news feeds are incredibly busy. Most people are spending their time on mobile phones. And I think one of the first things I wanted to do was to ensure that what we were doing is we were creating content specifically for our social audiences. So this is just a little bit of data just to look at how attention spans have changed over the years. So, you've got 12 seconds to get someone's attention, and that was 18 or 19 years ago, rather. Then it's 8 seconds, and now it's just 2.8 seconds because people are just overwhelmed with content. And if you're not landing your brand, if you're not landing or giving them a reason to watch as soon as possible, they will fuck off and they will go somewhere else, right? So, this is how long you've got to capture someone's attention on. 1.7 seconds. No time at all, right? But it only takes 0.25 seconds for someone to recall a piece of mobile newsfeed content. So what we're going to do, we have 0 time, but recall is kind of increasing, right? So that means that the traditional TVC, traditionally with television advertising is you have an emotional crescendo at the end, right? You have the big branding, you have the big end frame, you have the big end line right at the end. But social, you have to change that narrative arc, subvert it, because I'm sure, the social media professionals out there, if you look at the data, viewability on social isn't great. It's very difficult to get someone's attention first and foremost. Secondarily, it's very difficult to hold and sustain that attention. That comes with good creative, right? So at the very least, when people are on social news feeds, the very least you can leave them with is knowing the brand that they've interacted with, the message or the reason that they're watching, and a kind of key visual. So you want them to be able to recall the brand. You will have brand advocates, and you will have people that you bring into the brand, but ultimately you want to make sure that you're landing those key messages, you're landing your brand to build that recall and to build those memory structures. And this is kind of just a couple of examples that, that we've kind of been working on, because I think designing for mobile is all important. This is where people are going to be consuming your content, so ensuring that you're landing your brand early on, ensuring that you're landing your key message. Just get it out and make sure you're owning as much of the mobile phone real estate as possible. So the last talk, he mentioned Sir Byron Sharp. And Sir Byron Sharp, along with people like Les Binet, are doing incredible work. And I think what I want to do is to underpin everything that I do is to drive as much marketing science and marketing thinking into how we communicate. So I think that there's a kind of two-tiered approach with how we want to do things, right? First and foremost, we need to build the brand. And we need to bring new people into the brand, and we need to bring new audiences in. So how do we do that? So, we do that with the kind of big emotional advertising, those beautiful premium films. And then we try that, we run that with like broad reach campaigns, basically. And what that'll do is that primes people in emotionally and drives kind of longer term growth. Now, it's very difficult to track that in the short term. That's why you have this kind of sales activation. Now, the language you use with sales activation is more tactical. It's more short form. It's pithier. It's to the point. Whereas the brand building piece is a lot more emotionally focused, right? So I think it's very important to work out everything that you're doing. It's like, what is the overarching objective? What do you want to achieve from that? And how are you going to measure that? And I think like traditionally the kind of split that's talked about, it's like 60% brand building, 40% sales activation. If you're subverting that, if you're only going to be looking at short term, and the short termism only lasts for about 6 months, and then you start to see a decline. The other thing is the language is super, super important. So some research conducted by Oxford University and Kantar Millward Brown found in a study looking at about 8,000 different Instagram and Facebook posts, they looked at statistical consistencies, and one of the major statistical consistencies is language. And this makes total sense, right? So natural human language, brands speaking to us in the way we communicate with one another. Right? So when you're at the interface with a brand, make sure that you're communicating in a human way instead of just being a kind of abstracted, aloof type, basically. And if you find this alienating, so I found this absolutely fascinating. And all of this stuff leads me to the challenge, basically. So when I came in, we had Bang & Olufsen Play and B&O. So B&O Play with a kind of it was all about the quality headphone products. It was targeted at a younger audience. It was fresh. It was new. And Bang & Olufsen is the kind of the really expensive televisions, the televisions that cost as much as a car, to be honest with you. So what they wanted to do was kind of like throw both of those ideas together, and just launch as Bang & Olufsen. And that was kind of one of my first challenges. So essentially getting rid of B&O Play, trying to eliminate it from the internet as much as possible, and then eliminating that from everywhere, which is a nightmare, to be honest. And then ensuring that we integrate that tone of voice and that tonality of play and that freshness into the new brand. But the first job was to do a big cleanup. And then I guess what I wanted to do is that we needed to create a set of guiding principles for local markets to activate against, because if if we're going to unite as one brand, we want to ensure that we're communicating as that one brand everywhere we go, right? So I wanted to basically create a playbook. And what is it? So it's a global playbook and a guide to the creation and distribution of content across social media channels. And who's it for? This is for our agency network. This is for our local marketing managers. This is for our PR managers. And I guess that ultimately what we wanted to do is become a category leader and become a beacon of excellence in a connected world. And the bottom is to drive consistency across all markets. So if we go back to that point I was talking about, having landing the brand early on and landing that story and having that consistent visual identity, if you've got no time to capture someone's attention in a news feed, 1.7 seconds, if you've got a distinct visual identity, then that distinct visual identity will drive more recall. And if you have that distinct visual identity being leveraged and utilized across the globe, then you will start to build those memory structures. You will still start to build associations. You will start to build your brand. But that takes time. And you need a drumbeat of activity. You need to constantly be hitting those audiences regularly with broad reach campaigns in order to build that. And we understand that. And this is something that's very much in motion. And I guess what this guide includes is all of this stuff, right? So first and foremost is the measurement framework. We want to make sure that when we are publishing something, we understand what the metric is that we're tracking, and then we can deliver that back to the rest of the business. This underpins everything that we do, of course. Influencer marketing, influencer strategy, so that's everything from a selection criteria to how we measure. And I don't know about you, but influencer marketing frustrates the hell out of me, to be honest with you. It can be done well and it can be done effectively, but I think a lot of brands and a lot of people aren't doing it that well, and it's becoming a lot, and it's kind of because of the overuse of it, it's diluting the authenticity of it, and it really, really, really frustrates me. So what I want to do is drive a data-driven approach. I want to build authenticity with the kind of people that we work with. I want to ensure that we build their brand as they build our brand, and we build those long-term relationships, because then we can tap into their audience and they don't feel alienated when they interact with those ambassadors and influencers. Tone of voice, so going back to the point about the importance of having that human tonality, it's super, 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 super vital, and I think that the most important place where that lives is how you communicate from a customer service perspective, which is something that is often overlooked on social media, not taken as seriously, because it's a vital marketing channel as well. And I've worked with customer service teams across a variety of brands, and it's extraordinary how they're ostracized from a lot of what's happening. And they should be plugged into the PR, they should be plugged into marketing, and that's exactly what we're doing. Visual identity, back to what I was saying about those creative principles. Social media video principles, so telling a story across different platforms based on how people behave. So, based on someone interacting on Twitter will be slightly different to someone interacting on Instagram, making sure we create those clear sort of delineations. Customer service, crisis management. So, this is where listening can plug in, and this is where listening does plug in. So we have brand alerts set up. We understand what customers are saying in real time, and then we can react as a company. And then lastly, tools and guidelines. So everything from the tools that we have that our local markets to use to things like content calendars. And my next thing is like the retail network, because of the way we're set up is that we don't own our retailer network. And I'm sure a lot of people out there have similar issues, and I've had it on multiple brands I've worked with in the past. And retailers, everyone thinks they can do a bit of social. Everyone wants to be on Facebook because it's shiny and it's new, but what's the point? Like, what is it going to drive effectiveness for your little part of the business? Do people see it? We know reach is basically zero. And in order to do it, we need to run paid, we need to run broadcast. So I would question the value of doing it on a little level. But the thing is, the retailer networks still think that they can do it, and it really, really upsets me, to be honest with you. But we're sorting that out. And I guess what I want to do is sort of focus on education throughout the organization. This is some of the stuff that we use social for. So everything from customer service, plugging that in, managing reputation using social listening. Building that brand building piece is intrinsic to what we do. And there's a big insight piece, which is what I'm going to get to in a second. So social listening is becoming a huge, huge part of what we're doing, which is really, really great. And I'm about to take you through a very, very top line sort of case study with kind of how we run it. We're not at kind of 6 infinity stones at the moment with our social media capabilities or listening capabilities, but this is something that we're growing and we're building, and it's starting to influence everything throughout the business, everything from product to customer service to content creation. So it's fantastic. So I guess, like in short, like one of our products just wasn't selling as well as it should be. We had some we had some thoughts as to why it might be the case, but we thought that social listening would be one of the first ports of call. So we wanted to kind of identify some of the conversations around the product. We wanted to understand what people were saying, where the conversations were living, which markets where these conversations were taking place, and we also looked at the conversations around our core competitive products. Right, so we hypothesized that this particular product was being used in the sports community, and that the marketing materials that we're producing didn't really reflect that and weren't doing a good job of kind of bringing that to life. So this was the initial hypothesis, but the listening data illustrated a completely different story. So we found the conversation was primarily focused on design and technology. Now, with a brand that produces such beautifully designed and crafted products, it's a conversation that tends to happen across all of our products, to be honest with you. A lot of the conversation around Bang & Olufsen on social, whether it's the A9, whether it's the E8, whether it's the H9i headphones, it's always going to be about design and technology, which is both a strength and a challenge, right? But our competitive set dominated the conversation, but we were not present in that conversation at all. And share of voice was very low, so that was reflected of, largely reflected of media, and they were owning that conversation considerably. So the long and the short of it is that these insights helped to completely overhaul how we think about that product, and how we market that product. And everything has changed because of that. And the value that we've delivered back to the business, back to the product team, based on what we did with this little listening piece, has shown that now social listening is going to be plugged throughout the life cycle process. So everything from idea development, understanding the conversations around like-minded products, what other brands are doing, what are people saying, everything to introducing the product. So we're going to be super agile, we're going to move fast, and then we're going to understand right the way through that product life cycle process what the conversations are, how we can respond in real time, how we could change and tweak the product, how we can change the marketing, and this is how social listening is helping to kind of build into that. And beyond that, like talking about the customer service, is that the data generated through customer service channels is also hugely, hugely valuable. And again, I've worked on a variety of brands who haven't used customer service data as effectively as they should. Again, they're ostracized, they live on the side, and they're not integrated into everything. But this is an incredibly valuable, rich data source that can be mined and can be used. And again, plugs into the stuff that we're doing with listening. And that's what we're doing. And we're using it to deliver insight into things like content creation, to optimize, so we understand what the customers are talking about, where their pain points are, and we're able to kind of react in real time to all of that. So in short, to wrap up, start simple. You need to get those fundamental principles in place. If you don't understand what you're trying to achieve through social, if you don't have a measurement framework to reflect that, if you don't have the content creation principles, that visual identity, all of the detail, then it's just going to look like a mess, to be honest with you. And ask whether social is going to derive value for your brand. I mean, I would argue it always will do, but you understand what the value is. Because if you go back to right at the beginning of this, it's like one brand, it would be customer service, and social listening and understanding the pain points. And another one, it'll be about building the brand and so on, right? And it can work how you want to approach it strategically. Secondarily, is cut through the bullshit. I think there's a lot of jargon in social media, to be honest with you, and I think it's really, really important that we communicate to our bosses and our bosses' bosses and everyone else in simplistic terms, because otherwise we don't want to sound esoteric. We don't want to sort of overly complicate things when they should be relatively simple, right? And I think there's a lot of terminology that makes that makes it seem a lot more kind of obtrusive than it should be. And I think that we absolutely should just try to simplify and cut through it. And lastly is educate, 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 right? And I think there's, there are stakeholders, so everything from customer service teams to your creative teams, to your PR teams. What is happening on social at the moment? How are audiences changing? Is video more prevalent now? In which case, like, what kind of video are we designing for, right? What kind of channels should we be on? All of these things need to plug into the rest of the business. The rest of the business needs to respond in kind. Do not isolate yourself, because, again, I've worked agency side in the past, and I've always found that with agency side is social. The problems I had back in the day is that social is always that little bit on the end. So you have this big, beautiful campaign, and it's like, we'll tack on a little bit of social. Social should be plugged into absolutely everything that you do, to be honest with you. It should be the heart. It's where the conversations are. It's where your audience is. It's that classic fishing with a fisher. And last but no means least, do not stop listening, right? And this is where the quality, like Brandwatch, the quality social listening platforms can really, really drive value for you as a business. Understand how listening can derive value, understand the role it has to play, think strategically about how we use it. Don't just get lost too much in the data. Find out, like, how do you extrapolate the right kinds of insights, because it is so important when done right. But not many people do it right, so there's a huge amount of value to be done and to be derived from it. And that is a wrap.